Hello students, Mr. Sims here. End of Module 2's practice test for the test that's coming up this week. I'm just going to go over each problem, check your answers as you go along. So, starting with number 1, yesterday, temperature at noon. What was the temperature at midnight? Remember, I always try to read the last sentence first. Whenever you're doing problems that involve temperature change, we've talked about how drawing the picture helps. Yesterday, the temperature at noon was 38 degrees. So here's 0, here's 38. By midnight, the temperature decreased by 40 degrees, so that means it drops 40 degrees, and if it drops 40 degrees, that's going to put it below 0. So one way to do this is to take 38 minus 40, okay, which equals -2. Right. Number 2, which situation describes a hiker at a Death Valley stopping at an altitude of 0? So think 0 pair. And you just got to read through each one. Hiker starts at -10 and increases altitude by 10 feet. This would be -10 plus 10. Looks pretty good to me. Let's go through these other ones just in case. Starts at -10 feet and decreases. This is -10 minus 10. Starts at 10 feet and then increases. That's 10 plus 10. And then 0 minus 10. So the answer to this is A. All right, number 3. One thing we got to be very careful of in this is if you look at your answers, you have negative answers, you have positive answers. All right, very, very close. All right, orders of operations. Okay, remember, we talk about in the lessons of doing it piece by piece. We do anything that's inside parentheses first. -7 ABC 10 plus 0.15. We get -0.55, and now we divide that by -0.125. Divided by -0.1. And you get positive 4.4. But what you got to be careful of is just missing a negative in the calculator is going to throw your answer off, and you're going to pick the distractor. All right. Number 4, there's a couple more very similar ones. The one on the left, if you can recognize things like those being a 0 pair, and if you combine those two together, they're now gone. All right, so one of the things we talked about in one of the lessons is if you can, the less you have to punch into the calculator, the better off you're going to be. So you have -5/4 plus 4/5. Now that's all I got to put in. -4 ABC 5 plus 5 ABC 4. And you get 9/20. Okay. This one over here, okay. We don't have the situation we have over here, so for this one, remember, you got to show your steps. One thing that you might be able to do is recognize that the minus negative is always equal to a plus. -0.75 plus 2/5 plus 0.4. Also, we've talked about the plus minus really being the same as a minus. So one thing maybe you could do is, like I said, the less you have to punch in, instead of having to remember to go minus negative. So -0.75 plus 2 ABC 5. Remember, I told you guys to do this in pieces. So this is -0.35. And now I can add that to 0.4, which gives me 0.05, and then minus 3 ABC 4. And we get -0.7, and I'm going to convert this to a fraction, just in case. So remember, we can take any answer and we can convert it to a fraction. This is -7/10. There will be times where you have to leave it as a decimal. There will be times where you have to leave it as a fraction. All right, moving on. Okay. Just keep in mind, this video might be a little bit longer just for the simple fact of I'm going over a lot of problems. All right, number 5. What were his earnings? So he earns $10.50 per hour working at a restaurant. He has 1 3/4, 2 1/3, 1 5/12. Okay, one thing to do is to add all of these together. So 1 3/4 plus 2 1/3 plus 1 5/12. All right. 1 ABC 3, ABC 4. And we get 5 1/2, and now we multiply that by 1050, because it's making $10.50 per hour. and you get $57.75. Right. Number 6 is another orders of operations. And it also says explain the steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the math. One of the easiest things to explain is just do it first and then explain what you did. So we're going to do 2 ABC3 divided by 5 ABC6. Oops. 2 ABC3 minus. So what happens when you hit the wrong button? Negative 1/6. And then I'm going to divide it by 3/4. And I get negative 2/9. So if I explain, I would subtract first, then divide. Obviously, you would add more words in there. All right. Number 7. What was the total number of miles power walked and jogged last week? All right. So last week, Rachel power walked 2 3/5 miles per day for 7 days. So that's 2 3/5 times 7. Which is 18 1/5 miles. Then she jogged 5 3/4 for 4 days. So it's 5 3/4 times 4 days. Which is 23. And then you add them together. 41 1/5. All right, moving right along. Number 8, which expression can go in the blank to make the equation true? Well, the first thing is combining those two. And if you combine those two, you get negative 0.1. So that means that in the box, we would have to have a positive 0.1. All right. So now going through my choices, 6.7 and 6.8 is going to be like 13.5, so it's not that one. Negative 6.7 plus negative 6.6. You're combining two negatives, that's going to be negative 13.5. Okay. This is a zero pair, which means that this must be our answer. Which you can see, 7.2 plus negative. Remember, this is the same thing as 7.3. All right, the last one, the next one. Which equivalent? Just take 43, divide it by 12 on a calculator. What's repeating? That's the key. The bar goes over what's repeating. So we get 3.58. The 3 repeats at the end. That means the answer to this is B. After which transactions, balance the savings account be the same as the initial balance, number 10. Okay, that's the same thing as back to 0. All right. Withdrawals take money away. Deposits take money back. So here you're taking out more money than you're giving back. You're not going to get back. Here you're depositing and withdrawing the same amount. The answer to that one is B. Think zero pair. All right. And this one, number 11, this is a tricky one. Midnight the temperature was -5, the noon the temperature was 48. So let's look at this for a minute. Starting at -5, ended at 48. Has to go up 5 just to get back to 0, then up 48 more. So the answer to this is really 53. So what you got to do is we got to figure out which one is going to give you that 53. Positive 53, not negative. All right, I'm going to get rid of A. If I combine two negatives, it just becomes more negative. All right, the next one now. Remember, absolute value is part of the parentheses in the orders of operations. So the absolute value of -5 is 5 minus 48. Okay. Absolute value of 48, but see how the minus sign is outside? The negative's outside, so it stays negative. That's really the same answer as C. And then this one, combine the two negatives, negative 53, take the absolute value. And then number 12, how much money did she earn? All right. Mrs. Donaldson earns $18.80 per hour for the first 40 hours she works. She earns 1.5 times that for each hour beyond 40 hours. Last week she worked 45.5 hours. All right, so the first part is the base. She worked 40 hours at $18.80 per hour. 18.8 times 40, 752. So this is what we call her base salary. Right? Then she worked 5.5 hours of overtime. But the rate for overtime is not the 1880. It's 1.5 times that. So we'd have to take 1880 times 1 1/2 because it's 1.5 times that rate. All right, 18. Which would be $28.20 per hour. Multiply that by 5.5 hours because that's the amount of overtime that she worked, which would be $155.10. Then you add her base salary together with her overtime salary, and it's $907.10. All right. So this concludes Module 2's practice test. This is Mr. Sims signing off.